The soup bowl shattered against the polished oak floor, and 40 guests fell silent. On her knees, a rag in her hand, the cook did not flinch as the bride's laughter rang out. None of them knew that the trembling woman, wiping broth from the boards, held 3 years of secrets, a stack of unpaid debts, and a sealed envelope that would silence them all. 2 winters earlier, snow buried the Caldwell Ranch in northern Wyoming. Adelita Reyes arrived half-frozen, hired for her hands, not her name. The old rancher, Silas Caldwell, watched her wring out a scrubbing cloth and said, "Worth isn't what folks see at the supper table. It's what holds the roof up when nobody's looking." She didn't understand him then. She only nodded, kept her eyes down, and got to work. The lesson would take 2 hard years to settle into her bones. The Caldwell Ranch sprawled across 1,100 acres of grazing land, but money had never matched the size of it. Adelita learned the rhythms of the kitchen first. The cast-iron stove that drew poorly in a north wind, the root cellar where last season's turnips kept best, the precise moment cream turned to butter. She rose at 4 and slept past midnight, and the work suited her. Hardship was familiar. She had crossed a great deal of country to reach this cold place, and she was not afraid of cold. Silas Caldwell was a widower with a failing heart and a single son. The son, Everett, was handsome in the careless way of men who had never wanted for admiration. He rode well, laughed easily, and signed papers he did not read. He believed the ranch ran itself, the way a river believes the rain is its own idea. The old man's health declined through that first spring. His eyes clouded, his hands shook too badly to manage a pen. One evening, finding Adelita banking the fire, he pressed a folded letter into her palm and asked, in a low voice, whether she could read. She could. Her mother had taught her by candlelight from a single battered primer, and Adelita had never forgotten a word of it. So began the secret. Each night, after the dishes were dried and the household slept, she read Silas his correspondence, bank notices, demands from a cattle broker in Cheyenne, a letter from a lawyer regarding a lien. The old man dictated his replies, and she wrote them in a careful hand, and neither of them spoke of it during the daylight hours. What she discovered alarmed her. The ranch was drowning. Everett had borrowed against the herd to cover gambling losses and a string of unwise purchases, a matched pair of carriage horses, a tailored wardrobe, gifts for a young woman in town named Philippa Vane, the daughter of the region's wealthiest mine owner. Silas had hidden the worst of it from his son out of a stubborn, failing pride. Adelita began to act. With Silas's blessing, she redirected the household budget, sold a portion of the surplus hay, and quietly paid the most pressing debts from the egg and butter money she managed. She wrote to creditors with promises she intended to keep. She protected the estate the way a person protects a fire in the wind, cupped, hands turned back, patient breath. No one thanked her. No one knew. In the autumn of the second year, Everett announced his engagement to Philippa Vane. The wedding would be grand, he declared, befitting the union of two great families. Never mind that one of those families could not afford to butcher a second hog without consulting the ledger. An engagement supper was planned. 40 guests, imported wine, a menu Everett designed without once asking what it would cost. Adelita stood in the kitchen doorway as he listed the dishes, and her stomach tightened with each one. Pheasant, oysters packed in ice and freighted in at ruinous expense. She said nothing. She could not say anything, the secret bound her tongue. But that night, reading to Silas by lamplight, she found his hand had gone cold and gray, and his breathing came shallow. The old man was failing fast. Whatever was coming would come soon. The week before the supper, Adelita lay awake in her narrow room above the kitchen and turned the problem over, like a stone in her palm. She could speak. She could go to Everett and lay the ledgers bare, show him the liens, the broker's threats, the debts she had paid with her own careful management. But she knew how it would land. Everett did not see her. To him, she was furniture, a function, a pair of hands that produced meals and vanished. He would not believe that the cook understood his finances better than he did. He would feel accused, cornered, ashamed, and a cornered man strikes outward. He might dismiss her. He might, in his embarrassment, do something rash that sank the ranch entirely. She could stay silent and let the supper happen. Let the money bleed. Protect Silas's peace in his final days by saying nothing, and trust that after the old man passed, she might find a moment to make Everett listen. But every day of silence was another day the debts grew teeth. She could leave. That was the coward's door, and she considered it honestly, the way an honest person considers all the doors. She had savings. She could find work elsewhere, somewhere warmer, somewhere her reading was not a secret kept in the dark. No one would blame her. No one even knew enough to blame her. But there was Silas. The old man trusted her. He had handed her his pride along with his letters, and she had taken both and kept them safe. To leave now would be to drop the fire she had cupped so long in her hands, and there was something else, harder to name. She had come to love this hard, cold, struggling place. She had paid its debts as if they were her own. The 1,100 acres had become, in some private way, partly hers, not in deed but in care. She had earned something here that no ledger recorded. The decision crystallized on the third sleepless night. She would not speak before the supper. She had given Silas her word to keep his confidence until he released her from it, and she would not break that word to save herself discomfort. She would serve the supper. She would hold her tongue, and she would trust that the truth, kept faithfully, would find its own hour to be spoken. It was the harder road. It would cost her. She did not yet know how much. She rose at 4 and began to cook. The morning of the supper arrived gray and brittle with frost. Adelita worked the kitchen like a general works a battlefield. Calm at the center, everything moving around her. She had stretched the budget until it screamed, but she had managed. The pheasant was substituted with chicken dressed cleverly in wine and herbs. The oysters she had quietly canceled, replacing them with a soup of her own devising. A velvety potato and leek pottage finished with cream, the kind of dish that cost little and tasted of patience. She did not know that Philippa Vane had requested oysters specifically. She did not know that the bride had been told the menu and had been looking forward, all week, to refusing every humble thing the poor little ranch could offer. There was one guest Adelita had not accounted for, Dr. Tobias Hartwell, the county physician, a stout and gentle man who had tended Silas for years. He arrived early, ostensibly to check on the old man, and found Adelita in the kitchen. He had seen her there before on his visits, always working, always watchful. "You carry this whole house on your back," he observed quietly, accepting a cup of coffee. "Does anyone know it?" "It isn't for knowing," she said. He studied her with a doctor's patient eyes. "Things kept too long in the dark," he said, "have a way of coming to light all at once. Be ready for it." The supper began at 7. The Caldwell dining room, rarely used at its full capacity, blazed with every candle Adelita could muster. She had polished the silver until it threw back the light, pressed the good linens, arranged what flowers the cold season allowed, dried everlastings and sprigs of evergreen. From the kitchen doorway, peering out as she directed the 2 hired serving girls, she had to admit the room looked grand. It looked, for one evening, like the prosperous estate Everett imagined himself to own. Everett presided at the head of the long table, flushed with wine and self-regard, telling stories of cattle drives he had mostly watched from a distance. Beside him sat Philippa Vane, and she was, Adelita conceded, strikingly beautiful, pale and composed, with a gown the color of deep wine and a string of pearls at her throat that could have settled half the ranch's debts. She held herself with the perfect stillness of a woman who had never once been told no. The guests were the cream of the county, the mine owner and his wife, 2 cattle barons, a banker from Cheyenne whose name Adelita knew far too well from the letters, a judge, several wives in feathered finery. They ate the first courses with murmurs of approval. The chicken and wine drew genuine praise. A barrel-chested cattleman asked twice what the herbs were. Adelita, listening from the kitchen, allowed herself one small flicker of pride. Then came the soup. She had labored over it for hours. She had built the stock from scratch, simmered the leeks until they surrendered all their sweetness, pressed the potatoes through a sieve twice for silk, and finished each bowl with a swirl of cream and a single chive blossom floated on top like a small purple star. It was, she believed honestly, the best thing she had ever cooked. It was a dish that said, "We may be poor, but we are not without grace." The serving girls carried the bowls out. Adelita watched from the doorway, her hands twisting in her apron. She saw Philippa lift her spoon. She saw the bride taste the soup, and she saw the bride's face change. What crossed Philippa Vane's features was not disgust. Adelita would think about this for a long time afterward. It was something close to opportunity. The bride had been promised oysters. She had been deprived of her oysters by some kitchen economy she found beneath her notice. And here, in front of 40 of the most important people in the county, was a chance to remind everyone exactly where she stood and exactly how far beneath her these struggling Caldwells truly were. Philippa set down her spoon. She turned to Everett with an expression of wounded delicacy. "My darling," she said, and her voice carried, pitched to reach the far end of the table. "What is this?" Everett blinked. "Soup, my dear. Potato, I believe. Potato." Philippa let the words sit in the air like something she had found on the bottom of her shoe. "I was told there would be oysters. I was looking forward to the oysters all week. And instead I am served peasant broth." She lifted a small spoonful and let it dribble back into the bowl. "It tastes of dishwater. Truly, who cooked this?" The table had gone quiet. The banker from Cheyenne watched with narrowed interest. The judge's wife touched her pearls. Everett, caught between his bride and his pride, did the worst possible thing. He laughed nervously and tried to make light of it. "Now, Philippa, it's only soup." "It is an insult," Philippa said, and now there was steel beneath the silk. "Bring out the cook. I want to see the woman who thinks she can serve this to guests of my standing." A serving girl, white-faced, fled to the kitchen. "She's asking for you," she whispered. "The bride. She's asking for the cook." Adelita untied her apron, smoothed it, and tied it again. Her heart pounded, but her face was still. She had served many difficult tables in her life. She stepped out into the candlelight. 40 faces turned toward her. She felt the weight of all of them, the assessment, the curiosity, the faint contempt of people who measured a person by the cut of her dress. She crossed to stand near the head of the table, folded her hands, and waited. "You made this?" Philippa asked. "I did," Adelita said. "Potato and leek. I'm sorry it isn't to your liking. The oysters proved." She chose the word carefully. "Impractical." "Impractical," Philippa smiled. It was not a kind smile. She reached out, took her full bowl of soup in both hands, and turned it slowly upside down onto the polished floor. The soup spread across the oak boards in a slow, pale tide. The single chive blossom floated for a moment, settled. No one breathed. "There," Philippa said, setting the empty bowl back on the table with a delicate click. "That is where it belongs. And now you will get down on your knees and clean it up. In front of everyone. So that you remember, the next time you are tempted to serve garbage to your betters, exactly what your place's house is." Adelita looked at the spilled soup. She looked at the bride's lovely, triumphant face. She looked briefly at Everett, who had dropped his eyes to his plate and would not raise them. Everett, whose debts she had paid, whose ranch she had saved, whose father lay dying upstairs while he simpered before this cruel girl and her pearls. A hot, bright anger rose in her. For one trembling instant, she wanted to tell them all. She wanted to name the banker's liens and Everett's gambling, and the egg money she had spent, saving them, to fling the whole accounting across the table and watch their faces. She did not. She had given her word. Instead, she knelt. It was the hardest thing she had done in 2 years of hard things. She knelt on the cold oak in her clean apron, took the rag a serving girl handed her with shaking hands, and began to wipe the soup from the floor. The candlelight swam. She heard a few of the guests murmur. Whether in approval of the spectacle or discomfort at it, she could not tell. She heard Philippa's small, satisfied sigh. But here is what happened in that long, humiliating minute, while Adelita's hands moved across the boards. She was not ashamed. That was the strange thing. She had expected shame, and it did not come. Kneeling there, she understood with sudden and total clarity that the floor she scrubbed was a floor she had kept the family from losing, that every board beneath her knees existed under a Caldwell roof because she had cupped her hands around a failing fire and breathed it back to life, night after night while these people slept in comfort. The position of her body did not match the truth of her worth. The mismatch was so complete it almost made her laugh. Dr. Hartwell half rose from his chair, his round face dark with protest. Now see here, this is not. Sit down, doctor, Philippa said sweetly. This doesn't concern you. The doctor sat, but he caught Adelita's eye, and what passed between them was not pity, it was recognition. Be ready, his look said. Things kept in the dark come to light all at once. Adelita finished. She wrung the rag into the empty bowl, rose and stood with her chin level. Is there anything else, she asked, that I can do for the comfort of your guests? It was perfectly said. It was so perfectly said, so calm, so dignified, so entirely without the broken servility Philippa had wanted to produce, that a small ripple of unease moved through the table. The judge's wife looked at the bride differently now. The barrel-chested cattleman frowned into his wine. Everett's mortified silence had begun to curdle into something he himself didn't recognize, a faint, sick sense that he had allowed a wrong to be done in his own house. Philippa, sensing the room had not gone the way she intended, opened her mouth to press her advantage further. She never got the chance. A sound came from the staircase, a voice, thin, cracked, but carrying with the strange strength the dying sometimes summon for one last necessary thing. Every head turned. Silas Caldwell stood at the foot of the stairs. He should not have been standing at all. He had not left his bed in 9 days, doctor. Hartwell came out of his chair again, this time toward the old man. But Silas waved him off with one trembling hand and gripped the banister with the other, and his clouded eyes searched the bright room until they found, not his son, not the beautiful bride, but the woman in the apron standing beside the spilled soup. Adelita, he said. His voice filled the silent room. Where is Adelita? She stepped forward. I'm here, Mr. Caldwell. Come here, child. He drew a rattling breath. Bring my box, the one in the cedar chest. You know the one. She did know the one. She had known it for 2 years. The whole table watched, baffled, as the cook who had just been made to kneel and scrub the floor, crossed to the old master of the house, and he reached out and gripped her hand as though she were the only solid thing in the room. This woman, Silas said, his eyes moving slowly across the assembled guests, has read me every letter that has come to this house for 2 years. My eyes failed. My hands failed. Hers did not. He paused for breath. She has paid my debts out of butter money while my son spent the herd on carriage horses and pearls. She has kept this ranch standing. Every board you sit above she saved. The silence in the room changed quality entirely. Philippa's pearls seemed suddenly to glow with an accusatory light. Everett had gone the color of ash. Fetch the box, Adelita, the old man said, and the long envelope inside it, the sealed one. His grip tightened on her hand. It's time these people heard what's in it. For a moment no one moved. Then Adelita went, quickly, before the spell could break, up the stairs to the old man's room, to the cedar chest she had opened 100 times at his instruction. The box was where it always was. Inside lay the long envelope, heavy cream paper, sealed with a disc of red wax stamped with the Caldwell brand. She had written the document inside it herself 3 months ago, by lamplight at Silas's slow dictation. She had sealed it with her own hands. She knew every word. She carried it down. The room had not recovered its composure. The guests sat rigid, glancing at one another, recalculating everything, the struggling ranch, the lavish supper, the bride's cruelty, the kneeling cook who turned out to be the keystone of the whole arch. Everett had risen halfway from his chair, one hand braced on the table. But it was Philippa who recovered first. and Philippa, who attacked. "This is absurd," the bride said, rising in a rustle of wine-dark silk. Her composure had a brittle edge now, but she wielded it like a blade. "A dying man is confused, and a clever servant has taken advantage. Everett, are you going to let your kitchen girl stand here, holding your family's private papers in front of your guests? Who knows what she's done to that document? She admits she wrote his letters. She could have written anything. She could have forged." "I forged nothing," Adelita said. "Of course you'd say so." Philippa turned to the table, appealing to them, her beautiful face arranged into wounded reason. "Don't you see what's happening here? This woman has wormed her way into a sick old man's confidence. She controls his correspondence. She controls his money by her own account. And now, at the very hour of his death, she produces a sealed will that no lawyer witnessed, that no one has read, that she herself wrote and sealed. It is the oldest theft in the world. She is robbing this family in front of all of you and dressing it up as devotion." It was, Adelita had to admit, a clever attack. It took every true thing, that she had read the letters, managed the money, written and sealed the document, and tilted each one a few degrees until the whole picture looked like the crime of a scheming servant. She watched the doubt move across the guests' faces. The banker from Cheyenne leaned forward, interested. The judge, an actual judge, was frowning now in a professional way, weighing what he heard. "The young lady," the judge said slowly, "raises a fair question. A will written and sealed by an interested party, without independent witness, would not stand in my courtroom." Caldwell. "Sir, did anyone witness the making of this document besides the woman who wrote it?" Silas's breath rasped. He was fading. Adelita could see it. The strength that had carried him down the stairs was nearly spent. "I dictated every word," he managed. "Every word is mine. But who can attest to that?" the judge pressed gently. "Besides her." And there it was, the trap closing. Adelita understood the shape of it now. It did not matter what the will said. If the room decided she had manufactured it, then her 2 years of faithful work would be remembered as a long, patient theft. She would not merely lose her position. She would lose her name. She would be remembered in this county as the servant who robbed the dying. Everett, humiliated and frightened, would surely seize that story. It was so much easier for him to be the victim of a scheming cook than the wastrel son who lost the herd. Philippa saw the judge's doubt and pressed harder. "Send for the sheriff," she said. "Take the envelope from her before she can destroy it. Let it be opened by an honest man, not by the very person who stands too." "I stand to gain nothing," Adelita said. "So you say. I say it because it's true." Adelita's voice did not rise, but it carried. "You have not heard a word of what's in this envelope. None of you have. You have decided what it must say without reading a line." She turned to the old man. "Mr. Caldwell, they won't believe me. They'll believe the paper, or they'll believe nothing. Tell me what you want." Silas Caldwell lifted his head. Something in the old man's clouded eyes cleared for a moment, the way a winter sky will clear without warning to show one hard, bright star. "I want her to read it," he said. "Aloud, now, to all of you." He looked at the judge. "You want a witness? 40 of you will witness it. You'll hear it in my presence, while I draw breath to say yes or no to every line. If she reads a word I didn't speak, I'll know it, and I'll say so. Is that witness enough for your courtroom?" The judge inclined his head slowly. "That," he admitted, "would be witness enough." "Then sit down, all of you," Silas said. "And you," he turned his failing eyes on Philippa, "you'll be quiet in my house, or you'll leave it. You came to take a son. You'll not take a daughter's name from her on your way." "A daughter's name." The words landed strangely in the room. Adelita felt them land in her own chest and did not yet understand them. Philippa's face flushed an ugly red beneath its powder. She looked to Everett for support, and found, for the first time all evening, that he was not looking at her. Everett Caldwell was looking at his father, and at the woman holding the envelope, and at the spilled soup still faintly staining the floor, and something was working in his careless, handsome face that had perhaps never worked there before. Shame, real shame. Recognition of a man who has been protected for years by someone he never bothered to see, and who has just watched that someone forced to her knees while he studied his plate. "Philippa," he said quietly. "Sit down. Everett. Sit down." His voice cracked on it. "My father wants the will read. We will hear the will." Philippa sat. The victory had curdled entirely now. She could feel it slipping, and her lovely face was tight with the effort of holding a position that was crumbling beneath her. Adelita broke the wax. The red seal cracked cleanly under her thumb, the Caldwell brand splitting in two. She drew out the heavy folded pages, pages in her own careful hand, every loop and line of which she remembered forming. She unfolded them in the candlelight. Her hands, she noticed, had stopped shaking. She looked at Silas. He nodded. "I, Silas Henry Caldwell," she read, and her clear voice filled the room. "Being of sound mind and failing body, set down my last wishes on this, the 4th day of October, in the year 1887. She paused. Silas from the staircase said, in his cracked thread of a voice, "Those are my words. Go on." The judge sat back. The condition had been set and met. The old man would confirm each part. There was no longer any honest way to call it forgery. Philippa's whole strategy lay in ruins, and she knew it, and she sat with her pearls and her wine-dark silk and the dawning understanding that she had picked, for her public cruelty, the worst possible victim in the worst possible house. Adelita read on. The will began as such documents do, with the settling of small things, a watch to Dr. Hartwell, who made a soft sound of surprise, a sum to each of the long-serving hands, the brood mare to a neighbor who had been kind. With each bequest, Silas murmured, "Yes, those are my words," and the room grew stiller, and the truth of the thing settled deeper, and Philippa's face grew whiter. Then Adelita came to the central clause. She saw it coming 3 lines ahead because she had written it, and her own voice nearly failed her. Not from fear now, but from something else entirely. Something rising in her throat that she had not let herself feel in 2 years of cold and labor and secret faithful work. She had written these words at the old man's dictation, in the dark, never once imagining she would be the one to read them aloud, in the light, to 40 of the most important people in the county, while the man who dictated them watched her with the last of his strength to say yes. "Those are my words." She steadied herself. She read, "To my son, Everett Caldwell, I leave the south pasture, the house in which he was raised, and my hope that he will yet become the man his mother believed he could be." The room waited. Everyone understood that a son being left a portion was a son being passed over for the whole. Everett's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Adelita's eyes moved to the next line, and there her voice stopped entirely, because the next clause concerned her, named her, and she had written it in the dark, believing it a kindness she would receive after the old man was gone, privately, quietly. She had not understood she would have to stand in a blazing room full of her nabouters and read aloud, in her own voice, what Silas Caldwell thought she was worth. She lowered the pages. For a moment she could not go on. The whole weight of the evening pressed down on her at once. The kneeling, the spilled soup, the cold rag in her hands, the cruel, beautiful face, the judge's doubt, the banker's calculating eyes, 2 years of rising at 4 and sleeping past midnight, 2 years of being furniture, of being a function, of being a pair of hands that produced meals and vanished. She had told herself she was not ashamed, and she was not. But underneath the not shame was a deep and trembling exhaustion, and a fear she had not let herself name until this moment. The fear that even now, even with the will in her hands and the old man's voice confirming every line, they would find a way not to see her, that the truth would be spoken and the room would simply refuse it, the way Everett had refused for 2 years to see who kept his roof up. She looked at the next clause. She looked at the doubting faces. She thought, I could stop. I could fold these pages and say the old man should rest, and spare myself standing here while they decide whether to believe what I'm worth. Then she looked at Silas. The old man was watching her with his whole failing heart in his eyes, and his cracked lips moved. and though no sound came, she read the words on them plain as print. "Read it, child. Let them hear." And she found she was not alone after all, Doctor. Hartwell rose from his chair. He did not say anything dramatic. He simply stood so that the woman with the pages would know one person in that room was on his feet for her. And he said, in his quiet doctor's voice that carried all the same, "Go on, Adelita. We're listening. I'm listening." And then the barrel-chested cattleman, the one who had asked twice about the herbs, set down his glass and rumbled, "Aye, read it out, miss. Let's hear what the old man had to say." Two voices, then three. The room had turned the way a herd turns. All at once, Adelita lifted the pages and read. "And to Adelita Reyes," she read, and her voice did not shake now, "who came to this house a stranger and became its truest steward." She paused. Silas, from the stairs, drew a breath and said clearly, "Yes, those are my words. Who read my letters when I was blind to them, who answered my creditors when my son would not, who paid my debts from the humblest moneys of this household and asked for nothing, and who protected this estate from ruin through 2 hard years while no living soul thanked her." The room was utterly silent. Philippa Vane sat frozen. Everett had covered his mouth with one hand. "I leave the controlling share of the Caldwell Ranch and all its lands. 1,100 acres, the herd, the buildings, and the stewardship of everything I have spent my life to build." A sound went through the room, not a gasp exactly, but a collective intake, the sound of 40 people's understanding of the evening turning completely over. "I do this in sound mind and full knowledge," Adelita read on, her voice growing stronger, "because worth is not what is seen at the supper table. It is what holds the roof up when no one is looking. This woman held my roof up. Let her have the house beneath it." She lowered the pages. "Yes," Silas Caldwell said, in barely more than a whisper now. "Every word. Every word is mine." He looked at the judge. "Witnessed?" The judge rose. He was a careful man and a fair one, and he had spent the last several minutes revising every assumption he had walked in with. "Witnessed," he said gravely, "by myself and by all present. Mr. Caldwell has confirmed each provision in sound mind before 40 persons. I will say so in any court in the territory. The document stands. It was done." For a long moment, no one knew what to do with the silence. Then the barrel-chested cattleman began, of all things, to applaud, a slow, heavy, deliberate clap of his great hands. Dr. Hartwell joined him. Then the judge's wife, who had touched her pearls in disapproval an hour ago, and now touched them in something like awe. The applause spread down the long table like a fire finding dry grass, until most of the room was on its feet, and the woman who had been made to kneel and scrub the floor stood at the head of it, all with the will in her hands, and tears she would not let fall, standing bright in her eyes. Philippa Vane did not applaud. She sat rigid in her wine-dark silk, her beauty gone hard and small, and she understood. Anyone could see her understand it. That she had come to this house to marry a fortune and had instead publicly humiliated its true owner in front of every person whose opinion she valued. She rose stiffly. "Everett," she said, "I wish to leave." Everett Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Adelita. Then he did the first wholly honest thing he had done in years. "I think that's best," he said quietly. "I'll have the carriage brought round. But before you go, Philippa, I'd ask you to do one thing." He turned and walked the length of the room, past the staring guests, and stopped before Adelita. And there, in front of everyone, Everett Caldwell, who had let this woman be forced to her knees an hour before, got down on one knee himself, not in courtship but in apology, and bowed his head. "I never saw you," he said, his voice rough. 2 years, and I never once saw you. You saved everything I was too foolish to know I was losing. My father saw what I couldn't. He was right to leave it to you." He looked up. "Forgive me if you can, and please, don't turn me out. Let me learn from you how to deserve a place here. I'll start at the bottom. I'll start by cleaning my own floors." It was Philippa, in the end, who left alone that night, her pearls and her cruelty going out the door together into the cold. No one saw her to the carriage. Silas Caldwell lived 11 more days. They were good days. Adelita moved his bed near the window so he could see the south pasture, and she read to him every evening. Not letters now. Not creditors and liens, but the things he loved, almanacs and psalms, and the old poems his late wife had favored. On the last evening, he took her hand and said, "I never had a daughter. I always wanted one. I think I got my wish at the end, eh?" And she said yes, he had, and she meant it. And he died near morning with the south pasture going gold beyond the glass. The ranch did not merely survive. Under Adelita's hand, it began slowly to thrive. She knew its bones now, every debt, every acre, every place the money leaked, and every place it could be saved. She paid off the last of the liens by the following spring. She brought in a flock of sheep to work the poorer ground, started a dairy that became known across 3 counties for its butter and soft cheeses, and turned the kitchen, that had once been her whole world, into the heart of a working, prosperous estate. The hands who had served the Caldwells for decades found themselves, for the first time, paid on time and to the penny. Everett kept his word. He began at the bottom and did not complain. He mucked stalls and mended fence and learned, under Adelita's patient instruction, to read a ledger and answer a creditor, and tell the difference between what a thing cost and what it was worth. In time he became, as his father had hoped, a man his mother could have been proud of. He and Adelita ran the ranch as partners and, in the fullness of years, and to no one's surprise but their own, as something more. A marriage built not on pearls and pheasant, but on shared labor, and earned respect, the only foundation either of them had come to trust. And Dr. Hartwell, who had told her that things kept in the dark come to light all at once, was invited to every harvest supper the ranch ever held, and seated always at the right hand of its mistress, and served always a bowl of potato and leek soup finished with cream, and a single chive blossom floated on top like a small purple star. 3 autumns later, the Caldwell Ranch held a supper of its own. The long table blazed with candles, and the cream of the county came again. But this time they came to honor the woman at the head of the table, not to measure her dress. Adelita Reyes Caldwell rose to welcome them, and the first course she served, with her own hands, was a velvety potato and leek soup. No one threw it on the floor. The barrel-chested cattleman asked, for the 3rd time in his life, what the herbs were, and on the polished oak boards beneath their feet, boards she had once knelt to scrub in her humiliation, there was nothing now but the warm, steady light of a house that had finally learned what it was worth.